What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Valkyrie Elysium, Square Enix's take on an action combat system in the Valkyrie series, which released on Steam, which is the version we're checking out, just recently, a few days ago. That said though, to kick this video off, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while that does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that, so if you're interested in hearing everything that entails, and you're not subscribed, just go to my channel and the first video you'll see is a video explaining everything that I cover. Moreover, my Steam profile is public and linked in the description below, feel free to check it out. It's also important to mention that Square Enix did give me a copy of the Steam release to review this game with. But with all of that said, let's actually jump in and talk about this game a little bit. Now, as I've already mentioned, the game is an action combat system. Think Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, the more recent Solstice, for instance, that kind of game. However, it is also part of the Valkyrie series, which is a series dating back to the 90s that sees infrequent releases. Though that said, it doesn't really seem to have much to do with the rest of the series. Though if you are unfamiliar with the series, it takes a lot from Norse mythology, meaning that we see a lot of Odin, the Valkyries, of course, and things like that, which brings us to the setup for the game, and given the setting, it's more or less what you would expect. Ragnarok has begun, Odin is attempting to stop it, and he creates you, a Valkyrie, to help him with that endeavor. And as you might imagine, there's a couple twists and turns, though with this being an action combat game, the narrative is pretty straightforward. It is interesting though that there are 4 different endings, none of which are really missable. Once you've completed the game, you can actually load that save again, which will put you right before the last mission of the game, at which point you can go back and replay other missions, or just the end mission again to achieve the other endings, so relatively simple from that standpoint. Overall, I liked a couple of the endings, but the story as a whole, as tends to be the case with these games, is largely pretty average. Most of the characters don't get enough screen time to really get any proper character development, and as such, the narrative really just serves as a vehicle to move you from location to fight more enemies. But from there, let's actually talk about the structure of this game a little bit. Like most games in this genre, it does use a sort of mission structure. You will have Valhalla as a sort of central hub where you can participate in a training grounds as well as talk to your summons, which we'll get to in just a minute. But when you're ready, you go to the world map where you can go to Midgard, or the normal world, and take part in various missions. Each area, for the most part, has 2 major missions that see you combing most of the level, if you will, and while you're doing those, you can pick up side quests which are available as separate missions from Valhalla that you can participate in. Overall though, relatively short game. One playthrough of the story is probably going to run you about 12 hours, and then subsequent playthroughs, if you're skipping through cutscenes, are going to be much, much shorter. Now from here, let's talk a little bit about some of the progression systems at play. As you might imagine, there are quite a few of them. As you play through the game, defeat monsters, break environmental objects, you're going to be picking up a ton of gems. These gems come in a few different tiers, base tiers, as well as gems from specific stages that sort of level gate your progress. But gems are the currency that you will be upgrading most of your stuff with. And then we of course have weapons. There are a handful of them that you can unlock through the story, as well as a couple of side quests that will vary up your playstyle a little bit. Each weapon has a moveset associated with it, which will give you different combos, that type of thing, and they can be upgraded at a base level. This will increase, of course, their damage and your magic while using that weapon. Once they get to a certain point, you can attach runes to them. Runes are rewards for various side quests, as well as just found while exploring, and these will enhance an attribute of yours farther if you put it on the weapon, such as physical attack, damage reduction, that kind of thing. And then we have your skills. Skills are pretty straightforward. You have 3 different trees. They are relatively linear trees, and you'll use gems to upgrade all of these as you play through the game, which will make a lot of your base attributes stronger, as well as unlock the occasional extra move, such as the ability to double jump. Then we have magic, or divine arts as it's called, but basically magic. These run off of your arts resource, and you'll find various spells and upgrades to those spells as you play through the game, and they all deal some sort of elemental damage for the most part, though some of them are more utility focused, like a heal for instance. You can upgrade this resource as well as the resources like health and your soul bar, which governs your summons, which we'll talk about momentarily, through a variety of means. Oftentimes you'll get potions from exploring or completing quests that will increase your maximum of these just naturally. Other times your skills will increase them. And that, of course, brings us to our summons. Summons are a big part of the combat gameplay. As you move through the story, you'll eventually get up to 4 of them, each of which is assigned an element. This is important because elements are part of combat in a pretty substantial way, which of course brings us to our combat section. I will say for the most part, I enjoyed combat quite a bit. It's easily the best part of this game, which makes sense as that is the focus of the game. And naturally, a lot of it comes down to everything that we just talked about: weapons, magic, summons, and the elements. First up, the weapon you're using is more or less effective against various types of enemies, but you can only have 2 equipped at once, so you can swap between 2 different weapon types. The more you use them, the more they'll upgrade in proficiency, giving you more movesets to use as you move through the game. However, your summons are arguably the most important part of combat, because summoning them charges your weapon with the associated element. So if I summon the electric summon, I will get an electric charged weapon. Each enemy type is weak to various elements, meaning that the magic you use as well as the summon that you have equipped at the time is important. Now these summons can act on their own, and you can have multiple out all at once depending on how much soul energy you have. This is a resource that governs your ability to summon them. Though it is instantaneous, you just hit a button. If you have more than one out, whichever one you picked last will be the element that your weapon is charged with. This is important for maximizing your damage against certain enemies, especially on higher difficulties, because while normal mode is more or less a hack and slash, on Valkyrie difficulty, the max, it's very important if you want to deal enough damage to something to be hitting it with the right weapon and elements. And then of course we have our divine arts, which can be all sorts of magical attacks, single target AoEs, and they can deal substantial amounts of damage once you get them upgraded. And all of this combined makes a pretty fun combat experience for the most part. I did actually enjoy the combat a great deal. That said, it's not without its faults. You do have the potential to get stun locked pretty hard, which can be annoying. And this is largely down to a few things. For starters, sometimes you get backed into a corner and you're getting hit before you can do anything, which can be a little frustrating when you combine that with the fact that you cannot dodge unless you are not actively doing something. Which is fine, there are games like that, but in a more fast-paced game like this, the ability to not cancel an attack to dodge can be more frustrating than it initially sounds. And honestly, getting used to when to dodge and when you can dodge is probably the most challenging part of the combat system. But unfortunately, that's not the only issue we have here. There are some issues with the camera in particular, as sometimes you'll be fighting in relatively small spaces or you'll be up next to a wall. And in these instances, the camera has a tendency to either zoom way too far in or turn to an angle that you cannot possibly see anything at, which is honestly probably my biggest complaint for the game as a whole. But again, the combat is honestly pretty fun. But that brings us to the other 2 separate game modes. Alongside the Steam release, they did release a free content update as well, which added 2 new game modes to the title. And these are Hilda's Vengeance as well as Seraphic Gate. Hilda's Vengeance is very combat oriented. You basically move through several stages, very quickly gearing up from basically nothing to more skills, summons, etc. right out of the gate. And you play as one of the game's antagonists. Pretty cool, especially if you just want to play in short bursts and experience the combat without having to worry too much about anything else. And playing as a different character isn't bad either. But then we have Seraphic Gate. This is a series of set combat encounters where you'll move through various floors of a tower, each of which is a curated combat experience. You have to use set items, set gear, a set loadout, that kind of thing, and then defeat the combat encounter. So it provides a challenge beyond the sort of grindy-ish nature of the base game where you're just searching out various currencies, etc. to upgrade things with. Overall, solid additions to the game, nothing to get too excited about, honestly, but cool that they're there. You actually can't do either of those until you beat the game at least once, however, so something to keep in mind. Now that brings us to our Steam Deck compatibility. Unsurprisingly here, like a lot of games that started out on consoles, it runs pretty well on the Steam Deck. Obviously, some people prefer playing games like this with a controller, and naturally the controller support goes a long way to making this better on the Steam Deck as a result. And while the current status of Valkyrie Elysium on Steam Deck is a rating of unknown, it will likely get great on deck if I had to guess. The only thing I really noticed as a negative were the movies sometimes had a bit of a choppy-ish frame rate compared to playing the rest of the game, but the actual gameplay was quite good, actually. Again, games that typically start out on console or were developed for console with that controller scheme in mind and everything tend to run pretty well here, and you might have to mess around with some of the graphic settings, of course, to get a better battery life, that type of thing. But overall, thankfully, the experience on Steam Deck was pretty enjoyable, and I think there is a case to be made here for playing this particular game in short bursts with some hack and slash combat, especially with some of those alternative game modes that could potentially make this game an appealing option for when you're on the go or have like 30 minutes to burn. But that, of course, brings us to our positives and negatives. On the positive side of things, we of course have the actual combat. The combat is a lot of fun, and I think that's good because it's the core piece of the game. But unfortunately, even that doesn't come without issues such as the camera that I mentioned. The other big positive for me is the art style. I really enjoyed the visual direction of this game, especially some of the enemies and the way things moved. I was a big fan of all that. And then we have the negatives, which unfortunately outweigh the positives on this one. As I've already mentioned, the camera can be pretty rough. The story is also exceedingly average. There's a handful of characters, almost none of which get any real character development. That isn't over in like 30 minutes. And then because I was playing this on PC, the controls can be a little frustrating, especially in the menus more than anything else. There is no cursor available in the menus, which means you have to use the keyboard to navigate them, which is a clunky way to do it on PC on the best of days, but not totally unworkable. But all of that brings us to our conclusion. Ultimately, this is a game they are trying to sell for $60, at least here in the US, of course, but unfortunately, I don't think the game manages to justify the price tag. The combat is really fun, it has some great moments, but unfortunately, the negatives just outweigh the positives, and for that reason, it's pretty much a buy on sale for me. I would feel much better if this game were around $30, because that's about the experience that you have to expect, in my opinion. And like a few of other Square Enix's games recently, it feels a little bit on the experimental side. And to that end, I think if they were to refine the combat a little bit, fix some of the issues I mentioned here and there, and then bring that into a game that has more to offer, frankly, I think they could be on to something. But in its current state, Valkyrie Elysium is a decent experience, but it's certainly not a $60 one. So as I mentioned, if you see it on sale, I would definitely recommend you check it out for a much reduced price from $60. But that is all I've got for you guys today on Valkyrie Elysium. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. We are growing every day, and I truly do appreciate it. So truly, thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.